So we're going to start with the contour using divine charcoal. And I'm just going to try to get the outer edges of the skull. And I think actually because we've got these maple leaves at the top, I'm going to move the skull down a little bit. Again, I'm thinking about composition. Where am I going to place this? Where is everything going to be together? How's it all going to work together to create the overall design or arrangement of objects? I'm looking above this deer skull, and I'm seeing part of the central seam in the skull, which is right along here. And I'll use that as a way to help me place other parts of the skull. And of course the eye is a big one. And right here for the eye. And I'm seeing, because I'm on top, I'm seeing a little bit of the brow ridge on top of the skull. Looks like I need to move this antler back, and you see how I just use my finger to easily move the charcoal around. See a little bit of the back of the skull, and I see some of that central seam of the skull. Coming back here a little bit. The back edge of the antler comes around the eye structure, the bony structure around the eye. And so I'm using a contour line, and a contour line is used to describe the outer edges of a three-dimensional form. A contour line is varied, it's responsive, and it changes in accordance with the form that you're drawing, whereas an outline does not change or vary generally. It's used to draw a shape, such as a map or a comic. Okay, so we're trying to show three-dimensionality, so we're going to use contour. A little bit of value. We said values right now. I'm going to talk in just a moment about what values are in a drawing. Okay, so now I'm going to sit the skull on a pedestal. And it's a little concrete pedestal. It's kind of ornate. And I want to give that skull something to rest on so we can see where it's making contact, where it's anchored in space. And I'm going to use a little bit of a suggestion of linear perspective here, and I'll show you what I'm talking about in a second. And I'm using parts of the skull as a reference point to help me figure out where the edge of the pedestal is. Okay, here's a tooth that's kind of hanging out over the edge here, so that means I need to move this line underneath. Or move the tooth up. There's that edge. Okay, using linear perspective. These two lines are parallel. And this one is going to, this line over here is actually, imagine it kind of going on behind the skull. And these lines are all going to appear to converge at some point out in the distance, as if you were standing in the middle of a railroad tracks and you'd see that those lines would converge. I'm going to draw a little bit of the decorative, ornate parts of the pedestal here, and I'm just suggesting things. I'm not trying to get it just right, I'm just trying to place things and suggest where they are. It's like frosting on a cake or something. Okay, but I first need to find out where those edges are. And then there's another flat surface on this pedestal, and those lines also are going to run parallel with the upper lines, so they're going to also appear to converge at that same point on the horizon. lines are going to be parallel. This one, and this one. This is a really, I just think it's such a fun part of the drawing where you just really have kind of free reign to move things around, and you're not as committed, although throughout the drawing process, no matter how detailed the drawing, it's really important to be willing to move things around and be willing to let these marks show. These are part of the drawing process, and you want the process to show because that's part of what makes a drawing exciting, and that's how you build mark upon mark, how you build up shape and value and form. And it's, if you think of Edgar Degas, who drew the dancers, ballet dancers backstage, you'll see marks that he made, a hand in 3 different positions, and you'll see the residue of those marks from all those positions till he settled on one. So you actually get a sense of implied movement in the drawing. Okay, so I'm getting into value shapes here, so I'm going to step out of that for a second. I'm going to play with these lines a little bit more too. I'm not sure they're going where I want them to go. But I'm going to move up here and get the maple leaves suggested in here. The top edge of the skull just a bit more too. More of the rays in the nose ridge there, and then there's a little tiny little hole there for nerves. And that's where the maple leaf is coming out. Now I'm just going to suggest maple leaves right now. I just want to see how much space these leaves occupy and where they're going to go. I'm just going to kind of follow, and then I'll go back later and I'll make them really look like maple leaves. There's another one right up here. Won't make it into the drawing. And that's called cropping, where you take something off the edge. Sometimes cropping works, sometimes it doesn't. I think it might work fine in this case. There's a difference if you crop when you just run out of room. Say you're trying to fit somebody's feet or legs into a portrait. You make the legs too short so that you can fit them in. That's kind of cropping that doesn't necessarily work. So now I've kind of got the composition laid out, and I have it set off a little bit to the right, a little bit asymmetrically balanced, so everything's not right smack in the middle. And I'll be thinking about what am I going to do with all this space? I've got a lot of space here. For one thing, I want to see the corner of this plant stand that the pedestal is resting on. And then I'll have to think about what I'm going to do with all this space, whether it's just more ambient space, it's just going to be a use of value and marks, or if I'm going to define some shapes in the background. Right now, we just have foreground. Everything's right up front. And we're really right on top of, essentially, the objects. Now, we're going to look at something called value shape. We're going to look at the shapes of the values that we see. And values are essentially, when we're talking about a charcoal drawing, they're black and white and the range of grays in between. And what we want to do is see the black, the white, and the mid-value gray to start with. And as we develop the drawing, we'll begin to get some of those more subtle range grays in that are all along the scale there. But right now, I just want to squint down and edit out all those middle grays. And I want to see the darkest darks. You can see that in the eye. Same thing up here. I see some of this cast shadow, the shadow that falls off of the form is kind of a not as dark as the eye. And, you know, a few of these little pieces in here in the pedestal are a little bit darker. On the leaves are really in the light right now. They're not catching a lot of dark, but I do see a little dark right where that maple leaf goes into the skull. Okay. Now I see little darks on the teeth. Okay, now I'm going to start looking at some of the mid-values. And actually I'm going to use these mid-values to kind of help sculpt the form. So there are areas of value. This is a value shape. This little area here is a mid-value. Okay. This little area here is a mid-value. I'm going to follow that skull ridge again back. Let's see. That underneath, behind the eye socket. There's some mid-values, and that's too dark because that's not as dark as the darkest in the eye socket. So I'm going to use my eraser to lift some of this off. I also use my eraser as a drawing tool. So I'll come across here and lift off some, get some light in these teeth again. And I'll redraw them. Okay, I'm still using Vine, but what I'm going to do is go ahead and come through and develop this drawing using value shapes, and then I'm going to come back and start adding some detail with a compressed charcoal. And let me just get a few of these mid-values here so you can see what I'm seeing. The pedestal is much darker underneath than it is on the top surface. And it's not a whole lot darker than the skull, or more dark than the skull. But we want to show the skull is the whitest form up there. So where the light is hitting the skull, that is the lightest area in the composition. Okay, so after we're done laying out these value shapes, I'll come back in and I'll use a compressed charcoal and start working on some of the details. And again, with anything, whether you're building a house or you are just decorating a cake. You're going to build the cake, you've got to build the house, you're going to get the basic structure down first. You're going to work from general to specific, or from broad to detail. So one of the examples I use often is if you're painting a portrait, you're not going to start with the eyelashes. The eyelashes are last. So again, we're just trying to get basic shapes down to start with.